databricks in ADF. So what are the methods we'll discuss? Let me open Data Factory. But fortunately, we can create linked service in the data factory. Is a factory in the free subscription. For free subscription, Azure Databricks linked service will create a linked service. Let me go and create. There are two types of linked service store, especially when we select the data store. If it is source or target system, we'll select that. If it is compute means, right? Yes, from the compute to schedule from the data factory, because the code, everything will be executed from the compute services, right? Just here the data factory acted as a scheduler, right? You're a data scientist or data analytics, all the use cases you will implemented, right? The code you will execute from the data factory. But if you want to execute the data bricks from the data factory, right, there is a communication or connection should be established, right? Right. So coming to the connection, especially in the data factory, the connections will be achieved via linked service. If you want to set up any connectivity information in the data factory, the component is called linked service. Auto result integration that. Okay. If you want to execute any setup connectivity, right, so we have to use the linked service in the data factory, right? If you want to set up any connectivity like Oracle connectivity information, I'm not talking about integration runtime, so I'm talking about, yes, already you have the communication between your source or target objects, then you have to set up the connectivity, right? Then we'll prefer the linked service. Even that Azure Databricks already, because both are Azure services, right? Both are in Azure services, Data Factory Azure services. So we are talking about the Azure Databricks. Both are in Azure services, right? The gateway. So we'll use that auto resolve integration runtime. Right. Let me create. So this 100% interview question. Interview they will ask the question how you will set up the connectivity to Databricks from the Data Factory. Right. So we'll go via compute linked service. Compute linked service. Here you can write up some description information, then you can use that your integration runtime. Right here, you will select your Azure subscription, free trial, right? Free trial. Then you should select your workspace, right? You should select your workspace. While creating your Azure Databricks services, we should provide the Databricks workspace name, right? So this is your workspace name. So we discussed that there are two types of cluster, right? Job cluster, interactive cluster. Interactive cluster means all-purpose cluster. So the job cluster, right? The job cluster will be created during your process. While executing your notebook, before kick off your notebook, if you select the job cluster, it will create the cluster, then it will execute your notebook. Once your notebook completes successfully, the cluster will be shut down. So this process automatically. But that interactive cluster means the cluster should be created by developer or programmer manually in Databricks. All right, the cluster should be existed into the Databricks workspace. If you select that interactive cluster, right, interactive cluster, right, already cluster is available, that existing one you will use. But especially your productionized loads, right, productionized loads, your automated loads, people will prefer the job cluster. But if you select the job cluster without pool, right, without pool concept, it will take 3 to 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes to start your cluster. For example, you're doing some data processing. The data processing approximately it took some 5 minutes, just only data processing, right? But that overall the completion time 8 minutes, because that 5 minutes is took for data processing, 3 minutes it took for to kick off your cluster, to kick off your cluster. Especially if you're deals with any real-time data processing, you're talking about any near real-time data processing, right? People will not prefer the job cluster. People will prefer that interactive cluster. But if you select that interactive cluster, right, if you're not using still, they will charge that amount. But already cluster is available, it will not take more time, it will not take more time. But if in case cluster is inactive state, it will take 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes it will take, based on your configuration. If your configuration is very minimal, right, it will start very quickly. If your configuration is high configuration, you're using that more workers, right, you're using the more workers, it will take more time, it will take more time. Now see here the Databricks workspace URL, some HTTPS, right, ADB hyphen, some ID, Azure Databricks .net. So next, how can I set up the linked service? So these are the predefined information, right? Like see that authentication type, access token, managed service identity, managed service identity. So we'll go with first access token, right? That access token is the mandatory. Place that access token, we can use that Azure keyword concept also, right? We can use that Azure keyword concept, right? But how can I generate this access token information? How can I generate this access token information? Now we are using that authentication authentication type is called access token. Here we should provide that access token information. So where can I get my access token information? All right, go to your Databricks, right? Go to your Databricks, click on your user settings, click on your user settings, generate a new token, generate a new token, ADB LS, generate. Make sure to copy the token now. You won't be able to see it again. All right, we'll see. Control V. So especially in the real time, people will save this Databricks access token in Azure Key Vault. Right, because it's a kind of password information, right? Moreover, in Azure Databricks, especially DevOps, if you want to deploy the code from one Databricks to another Databricks, at the time that access token is also mandatory. Right? Let me provide that access token. Then see, the cluster versions are loading, right? The cluster versions are loading. So based on your access token, the cluster versions will be available in your linked service. Let's see. Okay, let me use this one cluster version. Let me go and select the cluster node type. All right, Python version 3 version. See here that worker options fixed auto scale. We had seen these options while creating into the cluster also, right? So that auto scaling, you will see that min workers or max workers. The fixed, right? You'll go with only the fixed workers. So the advantage of auto scaling, the scale, I mean, scale up and scale down, right? If you're going to prefer that auto scaling, you're not sure about your data volume. Maybe you're executing, I mean, a number of notebooks from within the single cluster, right? Then go and prefer the auto scaling. But you're 100% sure your data volume is fixed, right? Maybe you're not executing, right? Maybe you're not executing from the single cluster multiple notebooks. You're executing one notebook for one cluster. You're 100% sure about your data volume. Then go and prefer the fixed. Maybe single cluster, single notebook, you're not sure about your data volume. Then go and prefer the auto scaling. Sir, go and, I mean, if you're not sure about the data volume, go and prefer the auto scaling. You're 100% sure about your data volume. Always it is a constant. Then go and prefer the fixed. If you're selecting the auto scaling, definitely it will give the good performance. Right? Definitely it will give the good performance. But it will take some time to scale up and scale down, right? Big means it should perform some additional steps, additional tasks, right? Whether based on the data volume, it should increase and it should decrease. Basically, scale up and scale down, right? Let me do the test connection. Let me perform the test connection. Connection successful. Let me go and create the linked service. It successfully created the databricks linked service. So the authentication method, we are using that access token. Clear, right? So shall I repeat one more time? So this is very, very important, 100% interview question. Divya, any doubts?
Yeah, no.
Clear, right? Or you want me to explain one more time the linked service?
Clear.
Okay, super. So the step one,
One with managed identity, will you tell, sir?
sorry,
One with managed identity, access type as.
I will explain. Yeah, I've managed entity as well explain. That access token is important, right? That access token is very, very important because that managed identity, especially this option, very recently they launched. I mean, very recently they added this option, authentication type. So earlier was only one option, that is access token only. But very recently they added very recently, maybe hardly 6 months to 1 year only, they added that managed identity. Right? Especially if you're using that access token, go to your user settings. All right, user setting, right? Generate new token. Just provide your comment and generate. The key will be generated. Especially this access token concept is not available in your community databricks or maybe the regular databricks or normal databricks. Also, this option is not available. We had discussed, right, that Azure Databricks is best of Microsoft, best of Databricks, right? Right. So basically, they want to integrate with all that Azure services, right? All that Azure services. If they want to deploy the code, right? If they want to deploy the code from one Databricks to another Databricks, at that time the key concept is required. In Azure DevOps also, right? That authentication method, they will use that access token. They will use that access token. Right. Once you provide that access token, then the cluster version and the cluster node type, these options will be loaded. Otherwise you will not see this option. In case if you are providing the, for example, if you are providing the wrong token, right, so these versions it will not be loaded. Based on your workspace, these versions will be available. Based on your workspace, Databricks workspace, these versions will be available. If you're not providing the access token, you will not see the drop down list. Especially the cluster version, the cluster node type, the cluster version and the cluster node type. Right, the second option, right? Let me go and create the linked service. Managed identity. managed service identity. See, the load failed, right? The load failed because you haven't granted access between data factory and your Databricks, right? The managed identity name and manage grant data factory service managed identity access to your Databricks workspace. Go to your Databricks workspace, go to access control IAM, right? Go to access control IAM, add role assignment. Which one? DF1 AIC 2021. DF1 AIC 2021.
Sir, in the present Databricks, we have to add the ADF there, no, sir?
Correct. Basically, we are accessing Databricks workspace from this data factory, right?
Okay, sir.
Let me go and create one more time. Now see, now you're able to see the cluster version, right? The Python version is 3. Create. The step 1 LS creation, right? The step 1 LS creation. Authentication methods, 2, right? Access token and managed identity, managed service identity. For managed identity, you should grant that access between grant access to ADF from ADB access control, right? From access control IAM, right? So the access token, right? Generate access token from Azure Databricks from user settings, right? From user settings, right? Generate this access token, all right? Provide that access token while creating a linked service in Data Factory. Once you provide this access token, the cluster version, the node type, those options will be available from the drop-down list. If you're not providing, right, you will not see that option. It will see load failed, load failed. Either you can use access token or manager identity. Clear, right?
Yeah.
So the step one completed, right? The step one completed. Just assume maybe you have created, all right, you have created. Right, this is your notebook. Just assume this is your notebook. You want to execute this notebook from data factory. If you want to execute this notebook from Azure Databricks, cluster should be available. Now you don't have that cluster, right? So there is no way to execute your notebook, right? There is no way to execute your notebook. If you want to kick off any notebook, the cluster is required, right? Cluster is mandatory. Right? Cluster is mandatory. Okay. Then I want to execute Databricks notebooks from Azure Data Factory. Right. Let me go and create one pipeline. PL underscore data processing pipeline. All right. That activity, right, we'll use that notebook. That's the naming convention, activity, ADB. All right. Data processing. Right. Even you can use these options. The retry in case your Databricks notebook failed. Right, you can go and use the retry option. It will help out. It will help out. The step one, right? The step one. It if you for a 99.9% your cluster is job cluster only, especially the batch processing. Right? Especially if you are doing the batch processing, 99.9% your clusters are job clusters. Right? While creating also, based on the resources also, it will not create. It will fail. At that time, you can use the retry option. Means while executing a notebook, if it is failed, automatically you can do the retry option. If you want, you can do the retry option. If you want, you can mention the proper timeout option. Right. Already we discussed these options: the copy activity, delete activity. Right. Then go to Azure Databricks. Then select your right linked service. Right linked service. Let me go and use that ls underscore ADB. ls underscore. Next, from the settings, right? From the settings, you should select your path details. We discussed, right? 99, 100 percentage in the real time. The especially the notebook files will be available inside your shared folder, not from the users, right? Why we should not select the users? Nothing harm if you select the users also, nothing harm, it will execute. But as a best practice is always people will move the code into the shared folder. Users means this is your own play area. Here you can develop your own code, you can do the testing. Once you're happy with the code, then you should move the code or you should clone the code into the shared folder. For example, this is my code. For example, this is my code. I'm very much happy with this code. I'm very much happy with this code. Then I want to move the code into the shared folder. All right, shared folder. Just you can do the move or clone. Let me do the clone. Right. Go to the shared folder. Right. Let me create one folder inside the shared. For example, sales analytics. Get here. You can move the code right here. You can move the code. Let me go and select. Let me do the clone. Data processing. You want, you can prepare the notebook underscore data processing something, for example, sales information. Right. From the shared data processing, sales analytics. You have select the your notebook path. Next, if you want to add any libraries, right, you can add the libraries in your requirement. You want to add any jar files, any library, any configuration, right? You can add. So what is the next important here? The base parameters are very, very important. All right. Especially if you execute any stored procedure, right? Any database stored procedure, we discussed about some parameters, right? Right. We discussed about some parameter concept, right? What is the usage of the parameters? Because your notebook is expecting some input parameters. Based on the input parameters, the logic or code will be executed, right? If you define any stored procedure with parameters, the stored procedure will expect some parameters from the data factory or from normal execution or from anywhere, right? You're executing from the especially the database stored procedure from the logic app, the stored procedure defined with parameters. Please provide the parameters. Otherwise, it will take the default parameters, right? You have that option. You can define the default parameters. If you're not defining or not designing your stored procedure with the default parameters, then your code will fail, right? Your code will fail. Basically, your parameterized your stored procedure. If it is parameterized, you should provide the parameters, right? You should provide the parameters. Basically, you're executing a stored procedure from the data factory. Then from the data factory, from the stored procedure activity or from the lookup activity, you should provide the parameters. The same way, in case my Databricks notebooks I'm executing. I want to parameterize my notebook. I want to, yes, I'm writing some code. I'm designing some notebooks, but my notebook is expecting some parameters. Basically, my notebook is parameterized. That my notebook is parameterized. If it is parameterized, then you have to provide the parameters. Right? You have to provide the parameters. But how can you provide the parameters? Basically, you're executing your notebook from the data factory. From the data factory. From execution point, you should provide the parameters. The concept is called base parameters. 100 percentage your notebooks are parameterized. 100 percentage your notebooks are parameterized, right? From the data factory, right? Especially in that Azure point of view, right? The notebooks will be executed via data factory, right? Executed via data factory. Right? From the data factory, right? From the data factory, you're executing this especially NB data processing sales notebook. For example, if this notebook is parameterized, you should provide the parameters from the base parameters. There is no import option, right? There is no import option. But if you observe in the stored procedure, we have that import option. If you import, if the stored procedure is having the parameters, automatically the parameters will come. Then you should provide that only values. But here, unfortunately, we don't have that option. Unfortunately, we don't have that option. Manually, you have to create the parameters. Right inside your notebook, what is the parameter name? Right, the same parameter name here we should define. For example, let me go and create a parameter. For example, landing path, and my target path. Just as a landing path and a target path. Right, the landing path means right you have done that ingestion from SAP HANA to your Azure Data Lake Storage, the landing area, then you should provide the landing path. Like that YYYMMDD, right? Those informations also you can include your add dynamics content. For example, let me use this information. Let me use this information. Right slash Nestle sales landed files, right? Landed files. Then you can use your format data UTC, sorry, UTC now, right? If it is partitioning, right, you can use the partition value, but timing I'm giving the partition here. But in the real time, right, the landed files 99 by 99 percentage, right? date partition like year, month, day. You will see that year folder inside the month folder, inside the day folder, then you will see that files information. Right? Means this notebook is reading the data from this path. Right? If you want to write the data, or you want to do the date partition, you can do the date partition. In case if you don't have the date partition, Nestle sales processed. Right? Processed. Right? Inside you want to write the data for object wise, then you can provide that object. For example, your object is sales orders. Right? Can give. If you want, you can do the partition YYYMMDD. If you don't want to do the partition, you want to write the data into that only single folder, then don't do the date partition. Right? Don't do the date partition. Means, but your notebook should defined with the landing path, the TGT path. Means you're executing your notebook from the data factory. Your notebook is parameterized. Those two parameter values, right? You're sending from the data factory. These two values, right, received by your notebook. So this is 100% interview question. How you are sharing the parameter values between data factory to Databricks with the help of base parameters in ADF. Base parameters in ADF. Clear, right?
Clear.
Any doubts? Others, any doubts? Now we discussed about only base parameters defined in ADF. But the second step, your notebook should have that base parameter. Then only these two values, right, will send from the data factory to Databricks. Right. But basically, you're making your code more parameterized, right? More parameterized. Now, my target is orders. Right? My target is orders. Right? My target is orders. Next, you can create for right deliveries and sales information. Also, you can create. Right. So basically, your notebook is more parameterized, right? More parameterized dynamic code, right? Dynamic code. You don't want to do that hard code. You don't want to do that hard code, right? The values you want to send from, right? You want to send from data factory, right? The same notebook, if it is parameterized, right? If it is dynamic code, only we can change your landing path, target path from data factory. If it is not parameterized, right? If it is not parameterized, if it is hard coded or static value, right? The code, it will not be reusable for other objects, right? Other objects. Clear, right? How to create the linked service, how to select the notebook path, how to create the base parameters. Right? This is the regular way, right? This is a kind of a parameterized. Right, here you can include your add dynamic content, but these names, right? These names should be exist inside your notebook. So basically, these are kind of variable names, right? These variable names should be available inside the your notebook. Otherwise, it's not possible. Otherwise, it will throw an error message. Otherwise, it will throw an error message, or it will take the default value from that variable. From that variable, it will take the default variable. You can create a number of parameters. If the parameters are not available, it will not consider these values. It will ignore. All right. Based on your creation, if you are defining the default value, it will consider the default value. Otherwise, it will fail. That depends on your code design. Depends on the code design. Okay. So these two steps are mandatory. How to create the especially linked service for Databricks, how to execute your notebook from data factory, right? How to define the base parameters. Now this is notebook. In case you have the requirement that you want to execute only Python code, right? Then select a Python code. See, there is no browse file, right? There is no browse file. The example dbfs, the Databricks file system colon folder and your Python extension. Here Python extension. Here Python extension. Right here Python extension. Already we discussed, right, the Databricks file system, right? It is a internal file storage for Databricks. I mean, here you can deploy your code, for example. Here I want to upload one file. For example, I'm using this code. Okay, let me use this Python. All right. Then I will copy this path. All right. I'll go to here, dbfs colon. All right. I want to execute this Python program from Data Factory. Right. But the code should be uploaded into the your Databricks file system. Right. The code is available inside the file store tables j.py. I want to execute this code from Data Factory. Right. The Python file Databricks file system colon file store tables. All right. So basically, I mean, you can select your Azure Blob Storage ADLS also. All right. If you want to upload the data, right, Python files, any files, right, you can upload into the Databricks file system, because fortunately Databricks also it's having their own storage system, right? No need to copy into that Blob or any ADLS, right? Blob or any ADLS, right? You can upload your code files, your temporary data files into the Databricks file system. Right. If you want, you can upload. If you want, you can upload, or you can upload into the blob storage or anywhere. Clear, right? Either you can execute your notebooks or you can execute your Python file. But in the real time, right, 100% will use only notebooks, not Python. It depends on the requirement, right? It depends on the requirement. In case in your requirement already Python code is available, well defined. Maybe you want to execute some pandas, or maybe code is already available in the Python. Again, why should I redesign that code into that notebooks, right? Then you can go and design the Python. You can go and define the Python. There are two things, right? If you are using the notebook, right, it is completely PySpark code or Spark code. Depends on your programming language, either Scala or Python programming, SQL or R. Maybe this Python is not Spark code or PySpark code. It's a pure Python code. It's a pure Python code. All right. Then you can select the Python. Maybe you don't want to use any Databricks workspace. Already this code is tested, executed with the help of that interactive notebooks, right? Right? Maybe Python or Excel, execute Anaconda ID. Already you were tested. This code is already available. This code is already available. This code successfully executed for other projects. Just you want to read the same code into the your Azure cloud system. Just you can go and execute. But please copy that file into that some file storage. All right, if you want to copy, yes, you can copy into your especially file system. Or a database file system. Otherwise, no, if it is only pure notebooks, right, you can select that notebooks. The same thing, for example, from selecting, you can you can export the code in the source file called or iPath or notebook. Let me generate the source file. That it, done. That it, if I select into the folder, please provide the Python. If it is a notebook, if it is a notebook, then you can go and select the notebook. If it is a Python file, you can go and select the Python file. So it depends on correct. But if it is a notebook, right, go and select the notebook only. But if it is already only Python file, already tested inside the code, you're not using any Spark or PySpark API or framework, right? Only this is pure Python code. You're not using any distributed processing system. Means the Spark or PySpark. Right? This is complete pure Python code. Right? Then select the Python code and execute from the data factory with the help of Databricks component. For both Python notebook, the link service is mandatory. The cluster is mandatory. Without cluster, we right there is no way to execute this to. Let me publish. I'm not selecting the link service. That's why it's giving me error message. Let me execute. Let me execute this code. This URL. From this URL, you can monitor your data.
దిగే ఓపికలే కిందికి దిగే ఓపికలే కిందికి దిగే ఓపికలే వస్తూనే ఉంటుంది రోజు వే రోజు వస్తాను
Take 2 to 3 minutes to start. Go to your details. From the details, just click on this URL. If you click on this URL, it will open your Databricks workspace URL. Or Databricks workspace URL. See the parameters. These are your parameters, right? Landing path and TGT path. See message is waiting for a cluster. Waiting for a cluster. But the request has initiated to create the cluster, especially from this configuration, right? The cluster configuration it is creating.
Sir, in this scenario, when we run this one, we have selected a new job cluster, right, sir?
Correct.
So first it will set up the cluster, and once the cluster is on, then it will start executing the notepad. Correct, sir?
Correct.
And the one which we are trying to run now is a direct Python code which we have uploaded there.
No, this is not Python notebook only, right?
Okay, only the notebook one.
I removed that node of the Python, right? I removed the Python.
Okay, sir. Sir, while we are running only exclusive Python code, right, sir? In case in that time, if there is any libraries that are associated, like let's say if suppose we are running this RE functions into that, so that libraries we can add them in the while we are creating the notebook only, sir.
Yes, correct. I mean import, right? Import regular expressions, right? RE, right?
Yeah.
Right. For example, if you're explicitly installing the pip command, right, pip command, because the library is only import, right? You can include that import function. But if you're talking, I mean, indirectly, if you're talking about you want to additional software, right? Additional software, then you can use your some kind of your especially another notebook, or maybe you can install inside your cluster, right? Inside your cluster, the people related. Right? If you want to install some additional, for example, maybe I want to install some data factory related libraries, right? Data factory related libraries that don't use that people command inside your notebook, right? Create some common notebook. From the common notebook, you can install all your softwares.
Okay, sir.
See, the same error message, right? Limit required, submit a request for quota increase, additional details, right? Because it's trying to create the cluster. It's trying to create the cluster. But unfortunately, due to the quota limitation, right? The quota limitation, unable to create the cluster. See, the status failed, right? Either you will see the status succeeded or failed or cancelled. But cancel means still it is in execution. It is in execution. That output will come once the cluster is available, right? Once cluster is available, you will see that output window. I mean, this output box here, you will see that your main code output information. Main code your output information. Clear, right? This is your error message.
Yes, sir.
Right. Run page URL. Just click on this run page URL. You will see the log information of your notebook. Log information of your notebook. Right. You can capture this run error also, right? For example, the same data factor we discussed in the copy activity, right? You want to capture ADB notebook dot output dot run error, right? You can capture this error message into your log file. Right. In the copy activity, we discussed about that errors information, right? If it's success, you'll capture the how many records are extracted, how many records are loaded. For failed, we are capturing copy activity dot error dot message, right? The same databricks notebook dot output dot or run error. If you're taking this information, right, then you're capturing your databricks right notebook error message into your log file. At the same act, we can use that post completion of this notebook. You can connect with your store procedure, success and failure. Right? For success, you can mention, okay, this notebook, this is start time, this is end time, the state is completed. The run details, right? The run details, maybe number of records are extracted, number of records are loaded. But you don't want to capture, right? Maybe you can make it as a 0 value. In case if you want to capture those information, your notebook should return some values. Your notebook should return some values. From that return, right? From the return here, you will see that one more property, the return value. You will see the one more property, the return value means basically your notebook should return. Your notebook should return that values. Then only we can capture those output values from the notebook and you can send to the here Azure SQL DB. Otherwise, you can include the stored procedure activity inside the notebook also possible. Right again, why should I capture those details from the data factory like success or failure? If it is success, then I will add one stored procedure information inside the notebook. Then I will collect that information, how many records are extracted, how many records are loaded to my target system, what is the start time, end time. But those information also you can capture in the Databricks with the help of the stored procedure. I mean, you can use the Databricks API calls to execute the stored procedure to return that values, right? Execute the stored procedure, return that values. The returning values again you can send to the database also possible. No, I don't want to make out my code too much complicated, right? Then I want to follow some standard process, right? The standard process means I'm using some already existing stored procedure, the success failure, yes, you can include, but your notebook should return some value. Then only it is possible to capture the success rows or failed rows. No, I don't care about the success rows and the failed rows. Only I'm very much interested on the data ingestion, not for data processing, because I'm doing the too much transformation. Definitely my count, it will not match, right? Only I'm worried about the state of success or failure. If it is failure, I want to capture that error details, right? I want to capture the other details. I don't care about success rows, right? How many records are read, how many records are loaded, the throughput, those duration. I don't care. If it is possible, right? I will extract with the help of the UTC now and start time and end time. Based on that, I can build my the number of minutes or hours, the duration I can capture. I don't care about my throughput, right? Then you can ignore these details. Then you can ignore these details. Now you are expecting some information, right? You want to capture the details from the stored procedure activity, right? Your notebook should return some value. Then only it is possible. And we will discuss in detail how to return the notebooks, right? How your notebook will return that values. We'll discuss. Now you have executed your database notebook from the data factory. Said unfortunately the notebook was failed due to right the cluster issue, right? Due to the cluster issue. Clear, right? Any doubts?
No, sir.
Super. Yeah. If you don't have doubts, we'll go and discuss about here. No, unfortunately, here we can't do anything, right? Right, Jagdish sir? Unfortunately, here we can't do anything because it is a Azure Databricks. If you want to do anything, right, small minimal of execution of the code. So this very minimal code, right? Print statement. If you want to execute this print statement, still I need cluster. Without cluster, it is not possible to perform any activity, right? To perform any activity in the Databricks. The cluster is mandatory. The cluster is mandatory. The same Azure SQL DW. If you want to load the data into the DW should be on the end, right? If it is DW is in the pause mode, if you try to run any select queries, if you try to execute any stored procedure, if you try to execute any poly-based scripts, your code will fail, right? Because the DW should be online. If it is pause, you can't perform any activities. Here also same thing. Without a cluster, will not execute single piece of code in the Databricks. The cluster is mandatory. The cluster is mandatory. But unfortunately, we don't have this option in Azure Databricks. Unfortunately, we don't have option in Azure Databricks. But what is the alternative? Yes, we want to practice Databricks. We want to learn the Databricks, right? We want to learn the Databricks. Azure Databricks, right? So they're very smart. They're very clever, right? They require you to do that upgrade because they want to generate that amount, right? They want to generate that amount. If you're doing that upgrade to premium, right? We have to pay that amount, right? To learn the Databricks, so why should I pay that amount? All right. I want to learn under the free trial. Under free trial, basically, I need the basic configuration. I'm not expecting high configuration. Only the self-learning point of view. At self-learning point of view, I need the basic configuration. But still, I'm using the free portal, free subscription. But unfortunately, Azure Databricks, but we don't have option. I mean, we don't have privilege to create the cluster due to the limited resources. Right, under free trial, they have provided only the limited resources. But where can I practice my Databricks? Yes, I want to learn the Databricks. I want to learn the Databricks. But Databricks are equivalent to Spark. Means you want me to install the Spark explicitly, but again, it is hectic activity, right? Again, it is hectic activity. It is a lengthy process to install the Spark. All right. I don't want to, right, execute my code into the Spark. I want to execute the code into the pure on Databricks. Pure on, yes, Databricks backend, it will execute the Spark engine, but still I don't want to use the Spark ecosystem. I want to use the Databricks ecosystem. But where can I do the practice? Right? Where can I do the practice? Yes, provided free subscription. Free subscription that is called community databricks. That is called community databricks. Databricks. From this community data learn databricks, we can create a cluster also. We can create a cluster, but limited configuration. I think 15G configuration. You can execute your notebooks. You can create your notebooks. You can learn your databricks, But this community databricks, right? All right, in this community databricks, right? There is no way to schedule from the data factory, right? If you want to schedule your databricks notebooks, right, from the data factory, the databricks should be Azure Databricks, not community databricks, not community databricks, right? Plus the access token concept also not available. Definitely the managed identity also concept not applicable to community databricks, right? Because community databricks is a different component, Azure databricks is a different, both are in different ecosystems, right? Azure databricks, data factory, both are different component, but both are under same ecosystem, right? The community databricks is a databricks component, data factory is a Azure component. Here the providers also different, right? The providers also different. All right. There is no way to schedule your community databricks notebook from data factory. But we can execute your data factory pipelines from community databricks, not from data factory. You can execute your data factory pipeline from community databricks. Even you can execute your Azure data. You can execute your data factory from Azure databricks also possible. But from data factory community databricks is not possible. From community databricks you can read the data from the blob, you can read the data from the Azure SQL DB, you can read the data from DW. ADL is also possible. Even you can write the data to Azure services also possible. Azure services also possible. Read and write possible from the databricks, but only not possible to execute the community databricks notebooks or community databricks jar code or Python code from data factory. But here only the limited configuration, only limited configuration. The rest of things are all are same. All right, all are same. Maybe here you will see some additional options, models, right? But this model option is not available in your community databricks. This model option is not available in your community databricks. Basically this is kind of your data scientist related, right? Let me go and create, right? Let me go and subscribe to community. So this mandatory step for you also. Please subscribe your community databricks. Just go and search in the Google community databricks, right? Community database. The URL https colon community databricks dot cloud dot databricks dot com. Let me go into the login. Community databricks. Right. For example, let me use my existing one. Let me use my existing one. Sorry, call was. Yeah, you're able to see my screen, right?
Sure.
Okay, super. Let me log in my community databricks. Let me log into my community databricks. The same options, right? The same options also. The same options available in a community databricks and Azure. Both are same, but you're not able to see the one model option, right? You're not able to see the one model option. The same workspace, right? Users are shared, right? You will see the data, all right? You will see the data folder. You will see the Databricks file system, all right? You will see the Databricks file system. You can create a number of folders because this is a file storage, right? This is a file storage. You can create your cluster. But here you're not able to see the pool option, right? You're not able to see the pool option. Here you will see that only all-purpose cluster, job cluster, right? Here you will see that all-purpose job cluster plus the pools and cluster policies, right? You will see that you can create the policy also here. This is admin activity. You can clear the, you can provide the permissions also. You can provide the permissions. So these are pools and cluster policies are not available in your community. Only all-purpose cluster means interactive cluster, right? Interactive cluster. Interview they will ask the question. Tell me the types of clusters in the databricks. Two types of clusters. Two types of clusters. Right? Interactive cluster or all-purpose cluster. The name convention is same. All-purpose or interactive. The second one is job cluster. The job cluster, right? It will be created in the runtime. Right before kick off your notebook, the cluster will be created. It will execute the code. Once the code completes successfully, the cluster will be shut down. Right? The creation, everything will be done by in the runtime, right? By your data factory linked service. But all purpose clusters, right? Interactive cluster created by developer, created by the programmer, created by the data engineers or data scientist or data analytics team, basically created by the developers. The simple terminology, created by the developers. So manually we should create this cluster. You can go and use this existing one, right? But during your development runs, during your big, for example, you want to develop some code, you want to develop some code, right? First, you'll come to the Databricks, you will develop the code. Once you're happy, then only you will execute your code from the data factory, right? Right. Each and every single statement you will not go and execute from the data factory. It's a time-consuming process, right? It is a time-consuming process. The step one, you will finalize your code. You will design the code. Once you're happy with the code, but if you want to execute your code, you need the cluster, right? But in your development activities, you will use only interactive cluster. Only interactive cluster. Your productionized loads, if you want to automate your notebooks schedules, right, then people will prefer the job cluster, either job cluster or interactive cluster, right? This 100% interview question. Types of clusters in the database, two types: all purpose or interactive cluster. The second is job cluster. The job cluster will be created during in your execution of your notebook or Python code. The creation done by your linked service configuration. That interactive cluster design, created by the developers. Clear, right? Now this is my community. Now I'm able to see that only these two clusters, right? All purpose clusters and job clusters. Right? Let me go and create one cluster. See, there are too many limited options, right? There are too many limited options. If I'm creating the cluster, right, in the Databricks, right, I'm able to see the too many options, right? Enable auto scaling, termination, the worker type, driver type, right? The Databricks runtime, right? But these options you're not able to see because this is free subscription, right? The community, right? See, free 15 GB memory as a community edition user. Your cluster will automatically terminate after an idle period of 2 hours. So here you can explicitly select your idle time. Maybe you can select 30 minutes also. But here the default 2 hours, right? Here the default also 2 hours. You don't have any option to select 30 minutes. More of this, everything is, here the options are very, very limited. Options are very, very limited. For example, ADB. Let me use ADB SI. Right. Let me select my runtime version. Runtime version. See, 0 workers, only one driver. Only one driver or 0 work, because your code everything is executing inside the driver program. Inside the your driver program, not inside the worker. Means like your compute node, right? Workers nothing but your compute node, driver nothing but your control node in Azure SQL DW. Right here, 0 workers, only one driver. Two core means two virtual VMs, right? One Databricks unit. We will discuss, especially the cost estimation, right? The cost estimation we'll discuss. Let me go and create the cluster. Yeah. Now you're able to see the cluster, right? The cluster is running. Right. Now the cluster is available. If you want, you can execute your code. Right. And if I want to execute, I can select my cluster. You can execute, run all cells in this notebook, or if you want to execute one by one, you can give. For example, here I'm having one more cell, a equal to 10. All right, if a percentage to equal to 0. But if you want, you can execute one by one cell. You want to execute these two cells at a time, one by one, right? But all your cells sequential execution. But in all code, sequential execution. But either you can execute or run all cells at a time, or you can execute individual cells. You can execute your individual cells. So without a cluster, it's not possible to execute your code. The next step, all right, we'll create the free community, then we'll take some 15 minutes break, then we'll start the databricks that activities, right? What are the key activities in the databricks? Not these are not PySpark or Spark code, right? We'll discuss next only the databricks functions and utilities. Okay, then we'll start Spark, right? Okay, let me go and create the free community first. All right, but please follow the same steps. Community databricks, right? The step one, go and open this community.cloud.databricks. This is also cloud tool only, right? This is also database also cloud tool, right? Community.cloud.databricks.com, right? Let me ping you this URL. Just please open this URL. All right, please open this URL. Okay, let me log out first. Hit the step one. You're the new user, right? Just click on sign up option. Sign up. Click. Just please provide your registration form. Please provide your registration form. But here you can provide Sai Vinith. Right here you can provide your personal mail ID. You can provide your personal mail ID. Right, you can provide your Databricks developer. Right, optional. Don't provide the phone number. Optional. Don't provide your company mail ID. Also give your Gmail ID. Please provide your Gmail ID. Sai, can you please share your mail ID? Or let me take my mail ID. Samantha dot. Okay. Just please provide the your details. Then get started for free. Click on get started for free. Let's see here, Databricks platform free trial. community edition for students and educational institutions. For business, right? For business, it is a 14-day full features trial, excludes cloud charges, right? Exclude cloud charges. The same option, right? We selected Azure Databricks, right? But here, unfortunately, we don't have options to create the cluster. That alternative is your community edition. The Databricks platform, right here, that ecosystem either AWS or Google Cloud or Azure. See, means if you learn Databricks, you will get that opportunity either in Azure or AWS or Google Cloud. The Databricks is same. That only that ecosystem is only different, right? 80%, 80 to 90% is same. Only the 10 percentage connectivity to Azure, connectivity to AWS, connectivity to only the Google Cloud only differ. The rest of the 95% is the same. If you learn Databricks, happily you will get the job in Azure or AWS or Google Cloud. But unfortunately here we don't have option to create the cluster. Right? They clearly mentioned that 14-day full features trial excludes cloud charges. Right? If you're creating this Azure, right, the same it is equivalent to your Azure Databricks only. Right? Let me go and use the community edition. Let me go and use the see single cluster limited to 16 GB and no worker nodes, basic notebooks without collaboration. Right? Limited to 3 maximum users we can create. Public environment to share your work. Let me go and create, get started. Right. Let me go and create a started. Time to check your email. Let me check my Gmail. Get see, welcome to Databricks. Please verify your email address. You'll get one email to your email ID. Just you can. We need your verify your email address by clicking on this link. You will then be redirected to Databricks Community Edition. All right. Right. You can set your password. Right. You can set your password. Your username, your mail ID. Your username, your mail ID. Here, setting your password. See. Now this is your free subscription. But your data, the same options, right? 5 star and table. No cluster is available here. You can create your cluster. You can. This is your mail ID. If you want, you can log out and you can provide your mail ID. The steps are clear, right? How to subscribe to the community Databricks. The PPT also have given this. Right. The Databricks Community Edition is the free version of the our cloud-based big data platform. Its users can access a micro cluster, means 6 GB, right? Without worker, only the driver node, only one driver node that is also 6 GB. But all users can share their notebooks and host them free of charge with Databricks. So these are the steps. Just click on this page, right? submit a registration form, right? Then click on get started, right? Then you'll get one email to your email ID. Just click on that link, then do the reset, right? Do reset your password. Once you reset the password, right, then you will get one default home page of your community databricks. Here your username is your mail ID, right? Your password is, right, you have reset your password in the previous page, right? That is your password. Any doubts clear? Mm. Please create that community databricks. Okay, the community databricks. So we'll connect 9:15. We'll give 15 minutes. Please finish your breakfast. Okay, please finish your breakfast. Okay, we'll connect to 9:15. Then we'll close the call by 10:15. Okay, 15 minutes sufficient, right? The break. Others. Okay, yeah, you can take break. Yeah, we'll connect. Okay, after 15 minutes, we'll connect. Mm. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Sir, we'll connect in 15 minutes, sir.
Yes, sir. 9:15 will connect. Okay. 9:15 to
Okay,
9.
sir.
Okay. Please finish
Okay,
your.
sir.
Yeah, we'll give 2 more minutes. Okay. That's
Sumantro, you there?
you're able to see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, so super. Now you're clear, right? How to subscribe to the community Databricks, right? Now you're clear, right? How to create the cluster, right? Let me go and create one cluster, right? Zero workers, one driver. Let me go and create a cluster. So this was the interview question. Interview the question. Okay, what is the your Databricks version number? Okay, if you see, there is no specific version number, right? But if you observe here, right? If you observe in your home page of the community, the latest version is V 3.43, right? V 3.43. But if you observe in your Databricks, right? In a Databricks, there is no specific release, right? Then you can convey the message that latest version. Always you should talk about your runtime version, your Databricks runtime, right? If you're creating the cluster, right? You're using the runtime version, right? You're using the runtime version. Clearly convey the message. Yes, we are using the Spark 3x, Scala 2x, and the runtime version is like 7.5 or 7.4 or 7.6 or 7.5, something you can tell. For example, if you select 7.4, right? So this is your runtime version. Right? This is your runtime version. The runtime 7.4. You're using the Scala 2.x, Spark 3.0. Spark 3.0. Then you can mention, otherwise you can mention the latest runtime version. So which is the latest, right? For example, 8.1. So this is the year latest one. This is the latest one. They will ask what is your worker type, and right, maximum people will prefer DS4 for V2. 20 depends on this is also data volume, but in my last project, right, we have used only this standard DS4, right? We are doing the too much computing or some complex transformations are there, but earlier we had used 14 GB. But if you use 14 GB, so majority we encountered some heap issues, memory out of issues, right? Memory issues, heap error. So we increase it to the 28 GB. We increase it to 28 GB. This is I mean, especially that average configuration. You can convey the message. Yes, this is in case we talked about a huge amount of data, then you can increase your configuration. But an average, you can set. I mean, answer the standard DS4. You're using the runtime 8x. Runtime 8x, Scala 2.1x, Spark 3.1x. Means you're using the Spark 3x version. Spark 3x version. This 100% interview question. Okay, they will ask you what is the which version you're using. Always you should talk about your Databricks runtime. If you are using the latest runtime, you're using the latest Databricks cluster. But in the community, right? In the community, so we have that option 3.43. But we have that option 3.43. Right.
Sir, in that cluster type is there, na sir? So that standard cluster, that one,
Right.
can you
Yeah.
tell, sir? Cluster
That
mode.
right. If it is single node, I mean, you will use it only in the single node cluster. Right. See, there is no specific only one driver, right? Only 0 workers. The same it is equivalent to your community, right? Right? It is equivalent to your community. If you're talking about the standard, right? I mean, especially in the real time, for the standard means yes, combination of your worker plus driver combination. If you're talking about high concurrency, right? If you want to execute your parallel jobs, right? With parallel jobs, then I mean the configuration you want to select the very high configuration. See that high concurrency, the standard is 56 GB. Right. Directly selecting the especially 56 GB configuration. So when should I prefer the high concurrency? You're dealing with a huge amount of data. Right? You're deals with the huge amount of data, right? Then you can prefer that high concurrency. 90% people in the real time will prefer the standard only. 90% people will not prefer, especially single. So when should I select the single node? Is my I'm not processing huge amount of data. It's okay to send the data to my driver node. My entire operations I want to perform into the only driver, not into the worker node. I don't want to go with any, I mean, load balancing concept like master and slave concept, right? Everything I want to do that operation from the driver node. Then people will prefer the single. The single means it is equivalent to your community. It is equivalent to your community, but 99.99% in the real time people will prefer that only standard. High concurrency, it depends on your data volume, right? It depends on your, if you're selected the high configuration, definitely the charge also very high, right? Definitely the charge also very high, but in the average people will, I mean, average configuration, people will prefer standard DSO4, not DS3, DSO4, 28 GB. You can talk about yes. In my project that we are using the standard DSO4 V2, 28 GB memory, 8 cores, 1.5 DBU. But you can talk about if it is auto scaling, then you can talk about minimum workers to the maximum workers, right? 4 or 5. It depends on your data value. It depends on your number of loads, right? If you don't want to go with auto scaling, right, then go with fixed one, right? Fixed, for example, let me go with two workers, one driver. Clear it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now the cluster is available. Now this cluster is available, right? Your version, right? Please convey the message. Databricks runtime 8x, Scala 2.1x, Spark 3.1x. That is your Databricks runtime version. Okay. Especially you're using the standard clusters, you're using the standard DSO4, you're using the standard DSO4, you're using the 28 GB. Please, if you want, you can make a note down. This is 100% real question. If you said you're using the Databricks 3x version means this, then you're talking about only community Databricks, not Azure Databricks. If you're talking about we are using the 3x version means then that interviewer can guess you're not working onto the Azure Databricks. Clearly convey the message. Yes, Azure Databricks, there is no specific version. At Azure Database, there is no specific version. Yes, always we talk about your run based on your runtime version. You can talk about yes, we're using the runtime 8x, Scala 2.1x, Spark 3.1x. You're using the worker type, the standard. I mean, the cluster mode is the standard. We're using the standard DSO4 with 28 GB memory, 38 cores, 1.5 Databricks units. But if it is auto scaling, then you can mention your min workers and max workers. If it is not auto scaling, you can yes, in my project we're using the 2 workers. Okay, now the cluster is available. The cluster is available. So we discussed in the last class the Databricks, right? Databricks supports multi-language environment, right? Supports multi-language environment. Multi-language environment, more collaborative, right? More collaborative. You can create folders, right? Here you can create folders or notebooks, right? Let me go and create. Right, then here it is a multi-language environment. It means while creating your notebooks, you can select either Python or you can select Scala or you can select SQL or you can select or. If I'm selecting that Python, the Python means your Databricks cluster will understand. Okay, so the default code is a Python. The default code is a Python. Yes, I have to validate, I have to compile my code in the runtime. In the runtime, especially in the Python syntax. Especially in the Python syntax. Notebook, for example. First sample, notebook. See, the default language is a Python, right? The default language is a Python. All right, if you want, you can select your cluster. If you want, you can select your cluster. If you want to execute any program, the cluster is mandatory, right? Without a cluster, it is not possible to execute any piece of code, especially in the Databricks. but we discussed it is a multi-language environment, right? It is a multi-language environment. You can write any type of code, right? You can type any type of code. For example, my column names equal to id name q1 sales. This is a very very important scenario. We'll discuss in detailed q2 sales. For example, I want to do some kind of pivot logic. I want to do the pivot logic, but that unpivot non-pivot columns are constant. Id name is the key column. Those are non-pivot columns, but the q1 q2 q3 q4 up to n number of columns are that pivot columns. What is the requirement? These four columns, right? These four columns I want to split into that single column. I want, means data point of view, I want to split into the one column, one more column, the column header. Basically, six columns I want to create to three columns or four columns. Third column is a column name. Fourth column is this data. That fourth column is data because I want to create my code more dynamic, right? More dynamic. So this column names anyway I can read from my input file. So these key values are always constant, right? These key values are always constant, but the pivot columns are not constant. It will keep on change. I mean, keep on changing. It will keep on add, right? I don't want to hard code that values. Maybe the columns are 100 columns or 150 columns or 200 columns. So 200 columns I want to create into 200 rows, each row wise. But what is your requirement? My requirement, I want to create only the pivot columns. Now I'm talking about only the Python code. I'm not talking about any databricks. Right? We'll do the especially the list comprehension concept, right? We can use a list comprehension concept. X for X in column underscore names if X not equal to id, if X not equal to name. Then these are pivot. Correct. Then I can use this list. I generate some logic. I can generate some logic. I can perform some customization to build my SQL query. Okay. Let me go and execute. Let me go and execute. Now you're able to see Q1 sales, Q2 sales, Q3 sales, or Q4 sales, right? If you're adding one more column also, right? If you're adding one more column, right? For example, sales data. Because that id name is a constant, right? The rest of the columns are not constant, but I want to extract only the pivot columns. But I want to extract only pivot columns. Id name is the key column. These are non-pivot columns or unpivot columns, right? Non-pivot columns, right? I want to exclude this id common name. I want to, I mean, generate one list. I want to create one list with only the pivot columns. Now this entire logic I have written inside the Python programming language because this is my default programming language. Because that's my default programming language. But I want to execute my SQL queries. I want to execute my SQL queries. But how can I execute my SQL queries? Means you want me to use select star from, but for example, if the table is here available, you want to create one table. For example, let me create one table. Let me create one table. Forget about these options. We'll discuss in detail. But I'm creating one table. Okay. Let me create customer underscore test. Right. First row is header, inferential schema. Let Uday. Okay, I think we don't have header data. First name, last name, and email ID. For the table name, customer underscore test. At create table. This is a graphical, UI user interface, but in the real time, we'll write some code to create the tables to read the data from the CSV. That is Spark or PySpark APIs. Okay, just I'm creating one table. I'm creating one table on top of it your CSV file. So this is not UI. Let me execute this code. Let me go to my default code from the sample notebook. Right. What's your requirement? I want to execute. All right, on table. Right. For the table customer underscore CSV. Right. Customer underscore CSV. Customer underscore CSV. But I'm not right. Let me go and execute this customer underscore CSV. What the message? Invalid syntax. Let me go and create one more code with default SQL program. Default SQL, right? Notebook, customer CSV, right? Customer CSV. Let me go and create this notebook. Right. Let me attach my cluster. But what the table name? Select star from customer underscore CSV. Right. Let me go and execute. Now you're able to see the data. Right? Now you're able to see the data. Right. Now you're able to see the data. Right. See, customer CSV, customer test, two tables are available. Now you're able to see the data customer CSV. But if I'm executing the same code, let me open the new tab. If I'm executing the same code, I'm not able to get that output. It's throwing an error message, syntax errors, right? Invalid syntax, right? Invalid syntax. Why I'm not able to execute that code? Why I'm not able to execute the code? Why it's showing that invalid syntax? But here it's not showing any syntax errors, right? Here it's not showing any syntax error because the default language is SQL. The default language is SQL because your program is default. It is SQL, right? The default the databricks cluster will execute your each and every cells in the under SQL syntax. Under SQL syntax here your default program is a Python, but in the Python I don't have any select star from customer underscore CSV. So these kind of operations are not available in that Python, right? But in the day one we discussed about it is a multi-language support, right? It is a yes, it is a multi-language support. While creating into their databricks notebook, You can select any default language. That is not my requirement. My requirement, I want to develop one use case. I want to develop one use case, right? I want to develop one use case. In this use case, maybe 70% I want to use Python programming language, right? Maybe the second 20%, right? 20% I want to use my operations, right? Maybe 10% I want to use my Scala code. I want to use the Scala code. Alright, the Python SQL Scala, then I can implement one use case. For this use case, I don't want to write the three separate notebooks. I can write, but I don't want to use everything into the single notebook. I want to execute from this notebook Python, SQL, or Scala. Alright, I want to execute from the single notebook Python, SQL, or Scala. These three codes I want to execute. Alright, only this one use case I want to implement 70, 20, 10, 100%, right, with a combination of SQL, Python, Scala combination. But if I'm trying to execute select start from customer CSV, it's giving error message, right? How can I execute from Python default language to execute your SQL code? That is called magic commands. That is called magic commands, right? Your command start with use percentage plus your language name. What's the language name? SQL. Then it's changing the font, right? Just remove, select only from is highlighting in red color. The rest of things are in the black color only, right? Let me use my magic command. Percentage is your magic command. Then please mention your programming language. SQL, percentage SQL, select star from customer recipe. So whenever I'm executing my code from this command, the command start with SQL. The command start with SQL. Now, right, your Databricks will understand, okay, this entire cell he wants to execute under SQL. This entire cell, right, the Databricks will evaluate under SQL language. Here, no need to mention any percentage SQL because the default programming language is Python. The default programming language is Python. Same way here also, I want to write one program. Print, sorry, but if a percentage to equal to 0, print A1. It will go and execute. What the error message? Right? Some parse exception, right? Exception. While executing this code, mismatch input A expecting some XYZ keywords are available. It's giving the error message. But why it's throwing an exception? Why it's raising a syntactical issue or parse exception? Error in SQL statement. Because in SQL I don't have these kind of commands, right? In SQL I don't have these commands, right? I don't have this command. If you observe after colon, I'm entering, right? It's not moving into the, especially here, right? It should move to here, right? Because after colon, right? After colon, I'm writing the code inside that if block. But here, if I'm entering, right, the default in the Python editor, it will go to here, right? It will go to here, but not, it's not moving it to the your cursor here, right? Because this is not a Python, right? This is not a Python. This is the language is at SQL. This language is at SQL. So this language is SQL. You want to execute the Python code from this SQL default language, then we'll use the magic commands. Then see enter, sir, Python, right? See, automatically the cursor is moving to here. Let me go and execute. Now I'm able to see that output, right? Yes, if you can execute multiple languages from your default language. If you want to execute other programming language, your command start with the percentage plus your language name. Percentage plus language. Means this entire cell command dedicated for Python. Here you can't execute your select statement. Select, right? Select star from what the table name, customer underscore CSV. This is not possible, right? This is not possible. Invalid syntax. Invalid syntax. If you want to execute these commands, right, then you can use here. Right, then you can use here. If you want to perform any insert, right, operations, if you want to perform the joins, right, then you can write a separate command. If you want to execute any Python related stuff, right, you can use the percent because the default programming language is the percent SQL. So this is called magic commands. With the help of the magic commands, we can execute other programming code also from the default language with the help of that magic commands. Clear, right? Any doubts? Okay. So very frequently we'll use SQL and Scala programming language. For example, I want to use the Scala programming language. I want to use the Scala programming language. The simple, I should use the Scala. Percentage Scala. Right, in the Scala, we have the concept of val var. Val var means mutable, immutable. Val means it is immutable. The value always constant. Var means it will vary. Right, means it is immutable. You can change that value. Val a equal to 10. Right. Let me use the print statement. Print a. Into 10, right? Let me execute print a value. When name a is not defined, already a is defined, right? This A is dedicated for only the Scala programming language. But here you're executing print of A. This A, it's checking inside Python memory, right? The Python is checking, okay, whether do we have that A variable inside the Python memory. If it is available, it will give that output. If it is not available, name A is not defined. Because this A is dedicated for only the Scala programming language, not for Python. Not for Python. This A is dedicated for only the Python programming language. The Python programming language. For example, A equal to 100. That percentage scalar print A. Why are you able to see the 10, not 100? Because this 100 is dedicated for only the Python. This A is dedicated for only the Scala programming language. Let me use print of A because that is a global variable, right? The Python global variable is if you are executing under any Python code, that way A value will be reusable, right? The A value will because it's a global variable, right? It is a global variable. Clear, right? This is a 100% true question. I want to reuse one scalar variable in that Python. Is it possible? It's not possible, right? So these are especially the language dedicated variables, right? The language dedicated variables. If you're defining the scalar variable, yes, you can reuse in the scalar programming. If you're defining the Python variable, you can use only reuse the Python variables. But from the single notebook, from the default language, you can execute for multi languages also with the help of the magic commands. These are called magic command. Percentage space your language name. Percentage place your language name. This is called your magic command. With the help of that magic commands, you can execute other programming languages from your notebook. Clear, right? Others any doubts? Jadish sir?
No, sir. Clear, sir.
The magic commands are very 100% true question. Okay, this is very important.
And the scope of the magic command is only respect to that cell only, right, sir?
Sorry.
scope of the magic command will only be respect to that cell only, right, sir?
Correct. Because I think each and every programming language there is a REPL, right? Read, eval, right? Because each, sir, not read, eval, print, loop. Right? What it will do if you're using the match commands, that REPL, right? That REPL, okay, is I want to validate these comes under Scala. Here it will check the starting line is there is no magic commands. It will check under the default programming syntax. Yes, this command is dedicated for only the Scala. Command entire command file is dedicated for only Scala. Here you can write the Scala programming language. That REPL will evaluate your code syntax, right, under Scala programming language. If it is SQL, it will evaluate the code under SQL. Yet if you, for example, if I'm not using that SQL, if I'm using the select star from customer underscore CSV, these are not highlighting, right? Because REPL, right, it will understand, okay, maybe he wants to execute this entire code in Python programming language. While executing time, it will check whether do we have the same syntax in the Python programming language. If it is available, it will execute. If it is not available, it will raise an exception, right? Invalid syntax. Right? The same command if I'm using with the help of the percentage SQL. Now your REPL, right? If you're entering anything, right? If you're entering anything, it's immediately highlighting. Right? Yes. That select is a one keyword, right? Select star from also one of the keyword or underscore CSV. Right? The keywords will highlight in the color, right? Right. You can perform your where class also where underscore C0 equal to the where is the highlight right? This, the skill operations also you can execute. So these are Spark skill. This is your Spark skill, not your Oracle skill, not your Azure skill. This is your Spark skill. Here I'm using the skill means this is your Spark skill. Percentage skill means you should use the Spark skill syntax. So 95 percentage the syntax is equivalent to your Oracle skill or Azure SQL skill. Still we have more option in Spark SQL than your Azure SQL DB. Syntax wise 90 to 95 percentage both are same. 10 or 5 percentage maybe differ. All right. Clear at the magic comments. The advantage of magic comments clear, right? Happily we can do the more collaborative, right? From the multiple languages, right? You can easily implement that use case within single notebook. Right? You can add the proper dependency also, right? You can add the proper dependency. Any doubts? The magic comments are clear, right? Jagadish sir, others.
Yes, sir. Magic commands are clear, sir.
So there is no way to reuse one language variable to another language. This is 100% trick question, but what is the alternative? We'll discuss in detail as a one use case, right? For example, maybe the Scala programming output, right? Scala programming output, I want to reuse in Python programming language. Or Python output, I want to reuse in Scala. All right. Maybe I want to use some input parameters. I want to send some input parameters to the Scala. Right? How can I do these things? We'll discuss as a use case. The magic commands are clear, right? Any doubts in the magic commands? Okay. Yes, in case we don't have any doubts, we'll discuss about Databricks utilities. So this is very, very important. Databricks utilities. Okay. So we discussed here, right, that notebook some base parameters, right? So what do base parameters mean? Your notebook is parameterized. Basically, your notebook is parameterized, right? Means your notebook is expecting some parameters. But if you observe, your stored procedure sorry, create procedure name, right? Procedure name, for example, right? Here you're defining some input parameters, right? Like your pipeline name, right? Varchar 50, right? Your source name, Varchar 20, right? Because you're defining your parameters with at the rate, right? So these are your input parameters. These are your input parameters. If you define this SP with these two parameters while creating your especially stored procedure activity, you can do that import automatically. These two values will come, right? These two values come. Why those two values are coming right into the Azure Data Factory? Because the stored procedure has defined with these two input parameters. That's why you're able to see these two input parameters in Azure Data Factory. Here also we have defined two parameters, right? Base parameters or input parameters. These two parameters also should be available in your notebook. Then only it is possible to share these values to your database notebook. Otherwise, no use, right? If your notebooks are not having these parameters, what is the usage of these base parameters, right? Why I'm creating these two parameters, base parameters, to especially this notebook. Right? Why I'm creating, because yes, my notebook is having these two parameters. So that's why I'm defining, that's why I'm sending these two values to my notebook. If I'm not sending, it will consider the default values, right? It will consider the default value. But for the step one, but how can I create the, right? How can I create any, especially parameters in that notebook? How can I create the parameters in the notebook, right? How can I create the parameter? The concept is called widgets. The concept is called widgets. The concept is called widgets. Widgets nothing but your input parameters. Widgets nothing but a input so widgets is a not Spark concept, not PySpark concept. Widgets is a Databricks utilities. Databricks utilities. We have some couple of Databricks utilities are available. One of that utility, right? One of that utility is widget. One of the utility is widget. There are four widgets are available. Sir, not four. There are four Databricks utilities are available. One is widget. One is second is file system. Third one is notebook execution, sir. Notebook execution. The fourth one is here. Databricks DB start. The keyword related. So there are four types of Databricks utilities available. Four types of Databricks secrets. Secrets are keyword, right? Secrets are keyword. There are four types of Databricks utilities are available. So these are not your PySpark or Spark. These are Databricks code. These are data. Discuss it, the Databricks designed by the Spark team only, right? So they had taken the as it is the Spark framework, plus they added some additional flavor, right? The additional flavor is your utilities. That additional flavors is your utilities. The look and feel plus that additional features, right? One of the feature is utilities. But one of the feature is utilities. We'll discuss about widgets and file system. Okay. So what is the usage of the utilities? DB utils dot, just enter tab. Right. These are your different types of utilities are available. Right. Let me use the help. All right. Let me use the here widgets. Correct. Methods to create and get bound values of input widgets inside the notebooks. Inside the notebooks. Right. Let me use db utils dot widgets dot help. Let me get what are the options are available. Right. These are the different types of options are available in your widgets. The very important one, the get method and remove all text is very important. The rest of things are not important. As a data engineering point of view, not important. People will not prefer combo box. I mean, especially if you want to do some kind of, I mean, visualization, maybe these options will help out. But data engineering point of view will not do that visualization, right? But only for us, text and get remove all these four are very important. Right now we are using the especially DB utils. The utility name is widget, right? Then you should, I mean, provide your method name. Which method you want to use, right? Which method we want to use? Widgets dot. All right. Yes, I want to use the text. Before using the text, we'll take the help of text. What are the options are available inside the text? This is very text. Each and every notebook you will use the text. Right. The text contains three parameters. The first parameter is your input parameter name. The second is your default name. The third parameter is your label. See here, dvtools.widgets.text means your input parameter name is product. Means in the data factory, these values and the first one is both are should be the same. The second was the camera. In case if you're not providing any value here, right? In case if you're not providing any value here, it will consider the default value camera. Then you can remove the camera, you can put some blank. The third one is the label, right? You don't, for example, you want to give your own unique name, right? This you can create the label, kind of alias. Kind of alias. You can create your labels. But the default, I mean, the label is optional. The label, the value is optional. Right? The value is optional. Why it's optional? Because you are executing your Databricks notebooks from data factory. You're executing your Databricks notebooks from that ADF, not from that ADB, right? If you're executing from that ADB, if you want, you can create that labels. You can create the labels. Basically, it will create some text boxes. It will create the text boxes. Let me create one db utils dot widgets. Basically, the syntax is creating your input parameters with the help of the text. The widgets by default, it is a string data type. It will return by default, it is a string data type. By default, it is returning the string data type. Text, what is your input parameter? Alright, my input parameter. Alright, let me use some landing path. Let me use the landing path. Let me use my landing path. This is the first parameter. What is the second parameter? Second parameter is your default value. Second parameter is your default value. Third parameter is your label name. Now I'm not creating any default value and label. Let me go and execute. Just observe here. It will create one text box here. In this space, it will create one text box. Shift enter. See, you're able to see one text box, right? Correct. Basically, it's creating one text box. It basically is creating one text box. See the landing path here. You can provide some value. What your value? For example, file store slash tables slash customer.csv. Right, customer.csv. Now you're feeding the data into this text box with this value. That is a usage of the text box. Let me create a target path. Let me create a target path. Let me give some value. Let me give some value. File store tables outbound. Now my default value is file store tables outbound. Right? If you want, you can provide that value. If you're not providing that value, it will consider the default value. Let's see the target path automatically it is receiving from the default value. Right? See the first name target path, right? Here the first name is your landing path. If you want, you can provide your label also. If you want, you can provide your label. Right? Maybe for example, primary keys. Right? You can give your PK. Right? If you want, you can give your PK. Let's see. But here input parameter name PK is right, but label is PK. Right? If you want to give any shortcut, you can go with your label information. Here I'm not providing any default value because I want to provide explicitly my values with comma separator. Employee ID is my primary key. Employee ID is my primary key. So this is a way we'll set up input parameters. This is a way we'll set up input parameters. Clear, right? So the widgets is a utility of the databricks. With the help of that widgets, we can set up your input parameters. We can set up one input parameters. All right, that widgets text contains three parameters. The step one, your input parameter name. The second is the default value. Third one is your label. Third one is your label. The third one is your label. Any doubts? Yes or no? Super. So the next, okay, I'm creating the widgets, right? I want to retrieve the data, right? Just I'm only feeding the data, right? I'm only feeding the data, but I want to retrieve the data from this input box, right? I want to retrieve the data from input box. If you observe in your widgets, right? If you observe in the widget, there is one more, the method is a get method, right? Retrieves current value of an input widget. Your input widget is the target path, landing path, and PKs, right? I want to retrieve the data from this box. Then we'll use the get method. We'll use the get method. So if I want to use the get method, db utils dot widgets dot get. You're retrieving the data, right? You're retrieving the data from your input widget. That output, right? That input value, right? You want to assign to one variable, right? You want to assign to one variable, right? Then you can assign your landing path, L path. Right? What is your widget name? Your widget name is your first parameter, right? Landing path. Right? Let me go and execute. Right? Print L path. L path is your variable, right? It is a string data type, right? Right? If you want, you can see the type of the variable. This is your Python syntax, right? str, right? str. Because with the help of the get method, with the help, because we have to use the get method, right? You're sending that values, but I want to retrieval that value, right? I want to retrieval that value from my widgets or from my data factory. Those values I want to assign to this variable. This variable I can reuse in my entire program, right? To read the data from my landing path, I will use lpth, right? lpth, right? Let me use db utils dot widgets dot get. Let me use pick. Let me use the label name and we'll see, right? Primary key is equal to. Let me go and execute. But what is the error message? No input widget named PK is defined. But PK is defined, right? This is label, not your input widget name. What is your input widget name? This is your input widget name. This is your input widget name. This is your input widget name. But if I want to see the data, right? If I want to see the data, all right, happily I can execute my variable primary keys. EAD is my primary key. If I want to retrieval the data from that widget, we'll use the get method. It will extract the data from this widget and that value you can assign to one variable. This variable, all right, you can play in your program, right? You can play entire program. All right, your subsequent lines of the code, all right, you can use this variable name. Right now, your data is available. I mean, your primary keys are available inside the primary underscore keys string variable, right? You can use this variable in your further code, right? Right. Clear it. This is 100% interview question. How you're sending your parameters to your Databricks. The step one, we should set up input parameters to the Databricks with the help of Databricks utilities, one of the functionality or module that is called widgets, right? With the help of that widgets, we can set up that input parameters with the help of the text method. With the help of the text method, with the help of the text, will set up the especially that input widget name. If you set up the input widget name means you're expecting some input value to this widget, right? I mean, you can set up that values from the data factory, or you can set up your default parameters also. When these default parameters will be activated, right? When these default parameters will be activated, if you're not sending any values, right? If you're not sending any value, for example, let me use the target path. Right, what is the file store, right? Let me use this tmp, right? I'm changing, right? Because the default value, in case if I'm not sending any value from my tool, then it will consider the default value. But if your tool sending that value, right? If your tool sending that value, it will consider, right? It will consider the value from your tool. Tempo table outbound. If you're not setting up that value, it will consider the default value. Now the data is available, the values are available inside their variables. So in your program, you can call out these variables to read the data, to write the data, to perform offset logic based on your primary keys, right? Based on the primary keys. But clear, right? Okay. Let me create one.
Sir, when primary keys are multiple, we can enter multiple values in single column, sir, in the same widget
Yeah,
column.
comma separator.
Com-
Right? Either you
Comma
can
separator.
create the list or comma separator. Anyway, we'll discuss, especially that upset logic, right? We'll discuss the
Okay, sir.
dynamic notebook.
Okay, sir.
Widgets. Right, we'll check some program. Okay. Check even program. Right, we'll check otherwise. Okay. All right, I want to create one widget dbutils dot widgets dot text. Right, enter number. Right. I don't want to provide any default value. Right. Number equal to dbutils dot widgets dot get. Right. Let me go and execute this code. Right. If n percentage to equal to 0, print. Okay. Let me remove. Right. Then we'll see that any issues. Okay. Let me use the replacement operator. Correct. Nu rate, not an nu. Right. Not algorithm converted during string formatting. Why it string? Right. Let me execute type of nu. Right. Type of nu. It is a default texture, but I'm sending the 10 value. Right. By default, your all widgets are equivalent to string data type. Then we should use casting, right? Right. Or you can use evaluate function. All right. 10 even number. Right. 10 even number. Right. If you want, you can execute one more time. This I'm changing 11. But let me execute this command. 11 odd numbers. Right. Because the code is dynamic, right? The code is dynamic. Based on your input, it will check whether it is even or odd. Right? Whether it will check even or odd. Right? Whether it will check even or odd. These values I'm right sending from my databricks, my ADF, right? That ADF, right? I will select the especially that. Okay, this is this community one, right? Right. The same I will create that n input parameter, right? Here I will create, for example, if it is available, I will create an input value. Then I'm sending some value, some lookup dot output dot first row dot value, or maybe the copy activity output dot some XYZ value. Here I will send, right? From one of that activity output, right? Activity output is acted as a value to my n value. For example, if it is the 12, right? The 12 value, right, will receive from this n. That n value will assign to that nu. Then it will execute that code. Because this code is dynamic, right? Based on your input, it will check whether it is even or odd, right? If your code is not parameterized, for example, your code is not parameterized, just let me execute this code, right? Let me copy this code. Instead of nu, let me use a. Let me use a. Just a equal to 20, because this entire notebook will execute for only 20 value, right? But this entire code will execute. So this is not dynamic, right? For every time, right? It is evaluating, right? The 20 is even or odd. But each and every execution, my input will change, right? Each and every execution, my input will change. My input, I'm expecting some process, right? Some one of the process, I'm expecting my input value. One of the process executed, the process output acted as the input to my Databricks notebook. But because that ADF first will do the data ingestion into my target location, the target location path I want to send to my notebook, right? If it is not parameterized, right? If it is hard coded, every time I will read the data from the same path, because each and every day my path value will change because my partitions will change. Forget about the partition. Just I'm doing only reading. Basically, I'm doing the upset logic. If I want to do that upset logic, I need basically source input path and a target location and primary keys. If I'm having these three parameters, right, I can make out my code more parameterized, right? I can make out my code more parameterized. If it is parameterized, 100 files I can read, right, with the help of the single notebook. No need to write 100 notebooks, right? So when this is possible, if you're defining your code is parameterized. Parameterized means you should use that widgets concept. If you are using the widgets concept from your data factory, you should provide your source path, target path, and your primary keys. Then only it is possible to set up that values. Clear, right? Any doubts? So this 100% true question, how you are sending that values to your notebook. So basically how you are creating your input parameters in the Databricks with the help of the Databricks utilities, with the help of the widgets module, with the help of the text method, we are creating the input parameters to the notebook. If I want to retrieve the data from my input widgets, we'll use the get method.
So, Sumant, do we need to follow any sequence or number of arguments, something like that?
I mean, yes, right. We should follow, right? Here, whatever the values here, I mean, the name should be the same, not your order, the names.
Okay. How about number of arguments?
I mean, you can define a number of.
Now, what I'm saying is, let's say here we have three, but our notebook has only one as of now. So, will it still execute?
Or it will execute. These two values, it will not receive, right?
Okay. Okay. So, it will try to match with the names.
Correct. You're right.
Okay.
You're right.
Sir, in the small thing I missed, sir. This base parameter, whatever we declare here, no, sir, while creating the notebook, the same parameter can be passed value with widget.text only,
Correct.
right, sir? In
First,
the
what
notebook.
you will do? The step one, you will define the notebook, right?
Right, sir.
Step one, you will execute from ADF, right?
Correct, sir.
So what are the parameters or widgets are defined? The same name we should define in the data factory.
Okay, sir.
Right.
So you mean to say base parameters, whatever we have defined here in the notebook, same names has to be defined
Correct.
in the ADF.
Correct.
Okay,
First,
sir.
the step one, you will define the notebook. Second, only ADF, right?
Sir. Correct, sir.
Correct, right? The step one notebook. Second, only ADF is only execution, right? Here.
Correct, sir.
Without notebook, you will not execute from the ADF, right?
Correct, sir. Yeah.
Clear, right?
So, like
Any doubts?
only from From only ADF only we can execute databricks script.
Can you speak a bit loud?
From ADF only we can execute databricks script, right?
Correct. I mean, we can execute from here also.
Yeah.
I mean, you can create the job cluster, you can do the schedule, but people will not prefer here.
Okay.
You see, especially this is a community. For access, please upgrade your Databricks subscription. But in the real time, right, 99.99% people will schedule your Databricks notebook from ADF. Why? Because we'll maintain end-to-end flow, right, from source to till your AS refresh or Power BI refresh or your SQL DW refresh. Entire year flows you will orchestrate with the help of the single pipeline.
Okay.
Otherwise, for example, if you're executing separate Databricks or scheduling, I'm talking about ADF separate, ADB separate, but how you'll maintain the dependency, right? Once the ADF, your ingestion completed, then only the Databricks code should execute, right?
Yes. Yes.
Right, Kiran?
Yes. Yes.
Right. But how you'll maintain the dependency? Then we should think about the time dependency, right? Again, time dependency, there are some disadvantages, right? Because at any cost, the code should be complete. For example, I'm scheduling this notebook at 10 o'clock in the Databricks side. For this notebook, the source is your ADF target. I mean, your copy activity target is acted as a source to your notebook. The source is not available. So what is the usage of to execute this notebook? No use, right?
Yes.
Unnecessarily the program will fail, right? For example, you're taking YYY MMDD, that in the current day the folder is not available due to some error. Maybe the program was failed due to some error message, the program was failed, but you're executing your ADB code, the program will fail, right?
Yeah. Got it.
That's why people will prefer only one scheduler, that is data factory. Especially any data engineering in the Azure point of view, right? 99.99% people will prefer the data factory. Or you may use logic. From the logic app also we can execute. From that logic app, right? You should use the notebooks, or you can think about how to execute your notebooks from REST API calls. Right? How to execute your notebook from the REST API calls. Alternative. Right? Okay. In your project, maybe in the worst case, you're not using the data factory as a scheduler. You're using that maybe logic app. But yes, from the logic app, we know how to execute the data factories, right?
Yes.
What about the Databricks? Then you should think about, is there any way to execute your Databricks notebooks from REST API calls? So, but we have that options to execute your notebooks from REST API calls also, options are available, or some Python API calls also we can execute. Maybe in your project data factory is not available, only the data bricks and that integration via from that logic app, maybe Azure SQL DB. You're not using any blob storage, you're not using ADF. Maybe in your program Azure SQL DB and Databricks. You need one common scheduler, then you will use that logic app application. But from the logic app application, how can I execute my Databricks? How can I execute my REST API calls? Then we should think about alternative solution. Clear, right? The base parameters and widgets get method, because in your each and every notebook widgets are common, the get method is common. But if I want to remove all my widgets, right? If I want to remove my all widgets, you will use dbutils dot widgets dot remove all or remove. Right? Let me use the remove. Remove all means, right? Why should I use the remove? Is it mandatory to use remove? Not mandatory, but best practices we can use. But before creating that widgets, use remove all option, means what are the widgets are existed, it will remove and it will create the fresh widgets. Right? It will create the fresh widgets. Right now you're not able to see the widgets, right? Right? You're not able to see any text boxes, right? Here you can use your all methods. Right. You can use here all widgets creation. You could create into the one cell. The step one, it will remove any widget is available. Then it will create. Whenever you're executing your code, always it will create that widgets. Then it will populate the data, right? It will populate the data. The best practices, right? I mean, in the worst case, I mean, 0.01 percentage, right? Sometimes we'll encounter some issues in case your memory is not flush out, right? It will use the same still existing one. That's why as a best practices, we'll use the remove. Always it will remove all the widgets in that in memory. It will create the fresh one. If you're not including the remove all, the same, always it will create the fresh one. Sometimes it is not clear to any in memory in the databricks, right? Your driver, I mean worker, I mean memory, right? If it is not cleared out, it will use that existing one. Always best practices will use the remove. Nothing harm. If you're using the remove all, nothing harm. The step one, remove all. Then next you're creating the widgets, right? You're creating the widgets. If you want, you can give your print message. Keys. Right. You want, you can display that output on your screen. That always, whenever you're executing this program, it will remove the widgets if it is available inside that any memory. It will remove if it is available. If it is not available, it will not remove anything. Then it will create the fresh widgets. That you can use the remove function. If you're using the remove function, explicitly you should mention the your widget name. Otherwise, no need. You can use the removal function. Let me share this. I mean, please, I mean, subscribe to your community. I mean, community databricks. Okay, community databricks. Let me share this code. I mean, you can practice your all Python programming. You can practice your all Python programming. You can execute here. Just import. You know that how to import. Just go to your workspace, right? Select import option. Browse. Right. Download that file. Select browse and import. Select that file. from today class, at least you'll expect some 5 to 6 questions. Set up, especially Databricks linked service, that access token, the base parameters, widgets, or at the get method, or at these kind of questions you will expect from interviewer. Get the magic commands. The magic commands also they will ask you. The magic commands are very, very important. Interview 100% they will ask the question how you are executing from one language, one default language to other programming language. Maybe the default language is the Python. How you will execute your Scala programming, how you will execute your R programming, how you will execute your shell programming, how you will execute your Scala programming. With the help of magic commands. With the help of that magic commands, we can execute from one programming language to another programming language. Right, means your command start with the should magic command, the percentage, then the language name. The dedicated command is right. Especially the command is dedicated for the specific language. Whatever the variables you are using, right, those variables will be dedicated for only the specific language. There is no way to reuse those variable into other program. There is a way, but not variable concept. We have the other concept to reuse those values into that other program. We'll discuss as a use case. Okay, that's also very, very important interview question. From the within the single notebook, you can execute multiple languages with the help of the magic commands. You can execute SQL or Python, Scala, or shell programming also possible. Any doubts? No, right? Yeah. We'll connect tomorrow, same 7 o'clock. Okay. Not 7:30. Tomorrow we'll connect 7 o'clock. Tomorrow we'll finish the rest of the utilities commands. Okay. We'll finish the rest of the utilities commands. Then we'll start the Spark. Then we'll start the data frames. Okay. I will share that PPT. Okay. Okay. Thanks everyone. Okay. Bye. I'll share that PPT. Bye.
Thank you, sir.